What's up, everybody? Welcome to The Revival. My name is JJ, and man, if you are in our Discord, you know that I have had many opinions so far that I have been writing walls of text about when it comes to this game. So after doing that so often for so long before the game was out, and then when it came out and playing it, and now having finished it, I was like, you know what? I'm just going to do a full review on it. This is going to be spoiler-free, in addition to also not having the footage that I recorded. Instead, I'm just using only trailer footage and some footage you might find in the demo that was released, the free demo on PS5. So you don't have to worry about spoilers or anything like that. This is just my thoughts on the game, and I had a lot to say. So we'll just get right into it. Here we go with my review on Final Fantasy XVI. If you've watched my series on my top 100 video games of all time, or spent any amount of time watching my channel in general, you know that I've been a massive fan of Final Fantasy since the SNES days. Starting with 4, each new game that came out in the series had me amped with excitement, and ready to explore a whole new world filled with chocobos, moogles, Sids, and every other Final Fantasy trope that makes regular appearances throughout the series. I'll admit though, looking back, Final Fantasy X is probably the last single-player offline game in the series that I can say I really loved. I've liked the others that followed, sure, but for me personally, there's definitely been a big shift in the series since the first PS2 release, as it's slowly moved away from my own personal preferences. For a good while, there's been a big debate about what being a, quote, Final Fantasy really means, and what a, quote, Final Fantasy is supposed to feel like. I'm well aware I've said those words myself plenty of times in the past. I bring this up not because I believe I know the definitive, quote, Final Fantasy formula, but because I want to just make it clear that this review does indeed come from a place of what Final Fantasy has always meant and represented to me personally. That being said, do I think Final Fantasy XVI feels like a Final Fantasy game? Yeah, I absolutely felt as though I was in a Final Fantasy world with Final Fantasy characters following a Final Fantasy story. And yet, I still felt a massive disconnect with regards to my own personal feelings as to what the game should include while playing it. First off, the story. To be honest, this was definitely a highlight for me. I love the darker tone and really dig the concept of a world where magic is such a focal point and actually plays a big part in the politics of Valisthea. Clive is an interesting character to follow, and I like learning about his past and watching him grow throughout the game. There were a few segments of writing that had me rolling my eyes a little bit. One example that comes to mind is the ending with regards to a certain book. You'll know it if you've played it, but honestly overall, for the most part, the game had really solid dialogue and writing that was super interesting to follow. Unfortunately, I didn't feel as big a connection to the other characters in the game's story as I would have liked. But not for fault of the writing, save Jill, who I really liked as a character, but wish we could have gotten some more backstory about where she came from prior to living with the Rossfields. It actually had to do with the biggest reason I brought up what I felt houses my own personal preferences for what a Final Fantasy should, quote, feel like: the gameplay. I'll start with the combat. It's fast, frantic, flashy, incredibly responsive, and wonderfully designed. And I absolutely hated it. And just so we're clear, it has nothing to do with the game being action-focused instead of ATB or turn-based like earlier games in the series. I actually think it's pretty ridiculous that anyone would completely dismiss the game based solely on the mechanics themselves, as I think they work incredibly well and would give most gamers a hell of a lot of fun experimenting with the different icon setups and movesets that you can choose from. No, what I'm referring to is what having this choice of combat results in with regards to connecting with the cast of characters introduced throughout Final Fantasy XVI's story. A big reason I love the older games so much is because I'm not just focused on one specific character. I'm going through the story as a team of characters and going through each battle and using teamwork to then dictate how the outcome of each battle will go. Let's take Final Fantasy VI, my favorite game of all time, as an example. There's a reason why I connect more with Mog and Umaro than I do with characters like Cid or Banon. Cid and Banon obviously have major parts in the game's story and help our heroes at different points, but Mog and Umaro, assuming you've recruited them obviously, play an active role in combat as I, the player, am directly influencing, which stays throughout the entirety of the game from the moment of recruitment. Another example, Final Fantasy VII. While I absolutely love the characters of Biggs, Wedge, Jesse, and Bugenhagen, and they play a massive role in parts of the game, I don't feel as connected to them as someone like Vincent, who's completely optional, but again, if recruited, is someone I can play as and connect with them on a more personal level, because I'm actively involved in the choices they make to help with the outcome of each battle. While some of the character deaths in Final Fantasy XVI made me sad, the death of Aerith in Final Fantasy VII absolutely gutted me, because she was somebody I used regularly and was an active member of the party. That's what it means to, quote, feel like a Final Fantasy to me. A game where I can connect to my family of characters because they all feel like a part of the team that I'm actively involved with. Final Fantasy XVI sacrifices this to give the player a robust action combat system, which, as I said, works beautifully for a regular action game, just not for the kind of Final Fantasy that I personally prefer. I wanted to be able to choose who I could use in combat, and dictate their attacks and abilities, not just use one guy and hope that whoever else the story puts with me will help contribute when I need them to. It's fine for games like Horizon and Zelda, but Final Fantasy has always been about the team for me, not a singular character. Another issue I have with the gameplay revolves around some of the boss and icon battles. These are massive, epic events that are an absolute spectacle to experience. Yet, I found myself groaning and rolling my eyes quite a bit during them because not only do they drag on way longer than necessary, with some of them having way too many phases resulting in me checking my phone more often than watching the on-screen action, but because they separate out those phases with really pointless quick-time events that are almost impossible to mess up. Seriously, the prompts on the screen are for like a full 4 to 5 seconds or more. They could have easily just left those out and made them really fun and epic cutscenes to watch. But instead they feel like just a random meaningless chore that I need to do before I'm able to watch what happens next, breaking up any sense of immersion that I may have been feeling with the otherwise epic cutscene. There's a crafting system that is about as bare bones as it can get, and the same can be said for the equipment options. I played most of the game on the normal difficulty, mainly because I didn't know I could even switch to difficulty mid-game until way later on when it was pointed out to me, and also never touched the accessories that helped to make the game easier. For one, I didn't really feel like I needed them. Even on normal difficulty, the game was incredibly easy overall. The only reason I turned down the difficulty eventually was because battles were taking way longer than I wanted, and with me already not in love with the combat, I wanted to help alleviate that as much as possible. But the real reason I didn't use those accessories is because they take up equipment slots. I mean, I would have had to sacrifice where I otherwise would have used items like things that help with defense, or attack, or cooldowns on skills. Everything regarding the equipment and crafting just didn't seem very well thought out. I don't have issues with all aspects of the gameplay, however. Exploration is top-notch, and while some might mention the linearity in certain areas of the game, I never really felt as though I was necessarily confined at any point, and almost always had optional things on each map I wanted to check out. Side quests are very few in the beginning, but grow in number towards the end of the game. And while you won't get Witcher 3 levels of story from these optional objectives, I definitely felt that there was some great lore to be discovered should you choose to do them. The tasks themselves are pretty menial for the most part, but the dialogue that accompanies them was enough for me to stay interested and give them my time. While one of my biggest complaints of recent Final Fantasy games is that they seem to be sacrificing certain things to focus on visuals and making things look cool, there's no denying that Final Fantasy XVI is absolutely spectacular in the optics department. Everything from the regular ground battles to massive icon clashes to just walking through fields, forests, and cities is some of the best I've ever seen in a video game to date. There's no question they were shooting for the moon with this one and hit a direct bullseye. Even if you're just button mashing, Clive will still look like an undeniable badass on the screen simply due to the amount of flair put into each and every moveset at his disposal. I also think the decision to write the original script and do the voice acting in English at first was a really good one, because there were very few times that I looked at the lips moving and it felt like there was some kind of a disconnect between that and the words that were coming out. And speaking of characters saying lines, I'd be a fool to overlook the undeniably phenomenal voice acting that virtually every character has. I'll admit, I'm not typically one to even pay much attention to voice acting in games, as it's usually an afterthought for me unless it's painfully bad. But Final Fantasy XVI knocks it out of the park, with Clive and Cid being the big standout performances. And honestly, I can't think of any in the game where I felt anything less than appreciative with how much each and every voice actor seemed to give everything they had to their respective roles. The music is great and does what it needs to, but like Final Fantasies 12, 13, and 15, it comes off as more background music to help elevate the scenes than it does something that I want to take with me and listen to when I'm not playing the game. I'm not saying that's a bad thing at all. I just personally miss the old days with Uematsu making front and center melodic tracks that in many early Final Fantasies were pretty much characters in and of themselves. The music in 16 is great to help add adrenaline to an already super amped up scene, or help empathize with characters during an emotional moment. But it's not something I'm going to drive around in my car listening to, or hum to myself later on while doing chores. So there you have it, guys. My complete thoughts on Final Fantasy XVI. Man, this is one of those where I feel like I've used this a handful of times already. I think this should honestly go for every review ever, even though some reviewers may not say it. But it's just common sense. Play the game if you want to play it. I honestly, overall, would probably recommend people play this, because this is definitely one of those where it's like, sure, not everybody's going to love it, but I think for the most part, people are going to have a really good time with this. Just because I wasn't a fan of certain mechanics and the combat and that kind of thing, it doesn't mean I think they were bad, and that I don't know that people are going to enjoy it. Because it worked super well, and it was really, really incredibly done. It's just not something that I personally want out of a Final Fantasy game. And quite frankly, that's okay. It's a long-running series. I've got plenty of games that I love in there. Does it give me a little bit of, sadness for the future of the series as a fan? Yeah, maybe. But Final Fantasy isn't about me. It's about everybody. And, this is just such a series that has such a wide-ranging definition that it's like you really can't get mad at one game for being completely different from every other game in the series, when we've had several in the series that were completely different from others. So I appreciate them trying something new. I think it works really well for the vast majority of gamers, and I think if you try it, you're going to have a lot of fun with it for the most part, just unless you're somebody like me who prefers that old style of the team coming together and I am controlling everybody. And I hate when people say because it's not turn-based, bad. That's such a horrible way to voice the reason that I'm not a fan of it, and so you'll never hear me just say it blank slate like that. It's because I like getting to control and use the abilities of my entire party as a team while they're working together, and I feel like I'm one of the group. You know what I mean? So it's really, really tough to have enthusiasm for the future when the past few games have kind of been moving in this direction. I'm not saying I don't have hope for the future, because they're all so different. Who knows? Maybe we could see something that I absolutely love next time. I have no idea. There's no way to know for sure. I just know that when it comes to this game specifically, try it. because you might love it, and quite frankly, that's awesome. So yeah, guys, let me know in the comments what you think. What were your thoughts on Final Fantasy XVI? If you haven't played it yet, what's stopping you? Unless you're just not a Final Fantasy fan, you don't care, then I get it. Whatever. But honestly, this is a very unconventional Final Fantasy, even compared to a lot of the other games that are also would be considered unconventional. So I don't know, man. I think everybody should give this a shot at least a little bit. Try the demo. If you have a PS5, free demo. Give it a shot. It gives you a really good idea of what to expect. There's just so much to learn and so much to see here. So I'm curious to know what other people think. Fans, non-fans, all that kind of stuff. Let me know in the comments down below. Thank you so much for watching. Like, comment, subscribe, all that fun stuff. You know the drill. And as always, keep on gaming.